Among all the colony worlds of the old Earth Concordat, Terra Nova was its main jewel. When Earth abandoned the world and retreated into itself, the peoples of Terra Nova degenerated into civil war for countless cycles, until finally a modicum of stability re-emerged. But by then, the planet had divided into many different groups, alliances, and ideologies, each with different qualities making them unique. The most popular lines of division on the planet are often between the northern and southern hemispheres, and sometimes the equatorial wasteland city-states. On today's subject of coverage, we will be exploring one of said hemispheric divisions, that being the North. It is TN 1678, 224 cycles since Earth abandoned Terra Nova to fend for itself. One of the groups in the Southern Hemisphere that had arisen after the Exodus, the Southern Republic, had come to power over the other leagues that shared their hemisphere. After a series of forced negotiations and military conquests against its neighbors, the Republic proudly announced the creation of the Allied Southern Territories, which, despite its name implying equality among its members, was nothing more than a thinly veiled veneer of control by the Southern Republic over its unfortunate wards. And now, they were eyeing the lands of Northern Terra Nova. The three major leagues of the North, the Western Frontier Protectorate, United Mercantile Federation, and the Northern Lights Confederacy, were locked in a stalemate of what could be best described as low-scale, polite warfare. When the Southern Hemisphere united under the grip of the Southern Republic, the North took notice, but generally resisted the idea of unifying. But that changed with the Merchant War of TN 1686 to 1688. The United Mercantile Federation had its eyes set on a very resource-rich area known as the West Ridge Range. The only problem was that the Mekong Dominion wanted this region as well, eventually leading to a military conflict between the two powers. What resulted, though, was an utter disaster for the UMF, as the Dominion was able to bring the full military weight of the Allied Southern Territories upon the Federation. In the face of such overwhelming power, the Mercantiles could do nothing but flee or perish. After this defeat, both the NLC and WFP agreed to enter diplomatic talks with the Mercantiles. The only thing the three Northern Leagues hated more than each other was the idea of a Southern aggressor that could challenge and potentially subjugate them through military might. So in a very short amount of time, the former obstacles that prevented the North from unifying had vanished, and a new alliance had been founded, the Confederated Northern City-States. This alliance would endure for over 250 cycles through St. Vincent's War, the War of the Alliance, the destruction of Peace River, and the return of the colonial expeditionary forces during the 1950s. But no mistake should be made. Over the course of these cycles, the three leagues never truly became friends, as the idea of having to grudgingly work together to maintain their independence from the South, and later Earth, still remained the only element that truly kept the alliance together. As a result, many checks and balances were woven into the CNCS's structure to prevent the scales of power from tilting too much in the direction of one league's favor. Yet despite this, the Northern Lights Confederacy retained a slight edge when it comes to legislation, due to how the CNCS's government was designed. Each city-state within the CNCS sends one representative to the Inner Council in the capital city of Valeria, while the leagues themselves can send an additional 4 representatives along with those from the city-states under their control. Then there are also independent representatives from the city-state protectorates in the Badlands, namely Timmins, Wounded Knee, and Red Sands. Due to its number of city-states, the Northern Lights Confederacy has a total of 18 of the 43 votes in council. Its closest opponent in terms of votes, the United Mercantile Federation, holds 15. While the Western Frontier Protectorate has 7 votes, and the 3 independent cities have 1 vote each. Since all legislation is passed by majority vote, this makes the NLC a heavyweight power in the political sense. Surprisingly though, there is no official name for the representatives who take part in the Inner Council, but they do serve a term of 7 cycles with no term limits. Most representatives are either elected or chosen by their government, but due to them essentially being a mouthpiece for said governments, they are given little regard, and most citizens of the North only recognize the authority of the CNCS Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and the Grand Marshal of the Northern Guard, the unified military of the CNCS. But despite all these elaborate structures and rules, the three leagues did continue to have a history of very low-level conflict through border skirmishes and occasionally more serious fighting over so-called strategic sites in the Badlands. These divisions are only deepened by the prevailing religion in the Northern Lights Confederacy, Sorrento Revisionism, whereas within the UMF and the Protectorate, Sorrento Revisionism holds far less influence, power, and importance, but yet still remains a significant presence inside their domains. Revisionism itself was built by a Sorrento-born prophet who had communed with an unknown divine force during a spiritual journey into the Badlands. There, the divine commanded the prophet to start a new religion based on love and acceptance, which he did, eventually founding the Church of Revisionism. But this base form Revisionism never truly spread as far as Sorrento Revisionism did, which was formed shortly after the prophet's death. This new sect of Revisionism was far more fanatical and hostile, believing that it was the duty of their followers to bring harmony into a chaotic world by any means available. These ideas helped spread Sorrento Revisionism across the entirety of the North, eventually becoming the official religion of the Northern Lights Confederacy. While strong religious dedication had always been a priority in the NLC, by the early 1900s, similar attitudes were growing in the other leagues. This had caused some resentment with the UMF and WFP governments, who saw these trends as nothing more than the Norlighters trying to extend their power through religious belief. The assassination of second follower Thor Hutchinson in TN 1935, the leader of the Sorrento Revisionists, have only fed into this new religious outlook, and have fueled the hardline religious sentiments of the NLC in the Greater North. But while the power dynamic is tilted towards the NLC's favor, they are not untouchable, as efforts have been made to slowly move diplomatic leadership away from them and into the hands of the United Mercantile Federation. The UMF in recent cycles was able to facilitate secret meetings between the CNCS and the Mekong Dominion, with the possibility that the Dominion are looking to fully break away from the Allied Southern Territories and join the North, and if true, could be a critical factor against the AST in any future war. But that's not to say the NLC was content to be complacent with their position as top dog of the Confederation, as NLC diplomats were able to negotiate a deal with the weapons manufacturer Paxton Arms to send weapons to the rebels within the Eastern Sun Emirates, another league in the south. But whether the NLC will retain its position of leadership within the CNCS, or be usurped by the Mercantiles in later cycles, is anyone's guess. As might be suspected, the three major leagues of the Confederated Northern City-States are wildly diverse and deserving of further scrutiny, and there is no better place to start than with the unofficial leaders of the CNCS, the Northern Lights Confederacy. The NLC is the largest northern power bloc, with the Sorrento branch of Revisionism being born alongside it during the Reconstruction era, the time when the civil wars after the departure of Earth ended and the Terra Novans focused on rebuilding. This new sect of Revisionism at the time helped to unify the city-states of what would become the Northern Lights Confederacy, which eventually grew to encompass 14 city-states. But this process of revisionism-fueled expansion was never entirely peaceful, and the NLC, being the devout revisionists they are, have a tendency towards fanaticism. This was proven quite visibly between the cycles of TN 1530 to 1537, when the NLC embarked upon a great crusade to bring its neighboring city-states into the light of revisionism. At first, the new NLC armies went into these cities under the guise of protecting their revisionist followers, and if it was deemed necessary for that goal, those cities would become fully annexed by the Norlighters. The Great Crusade only ended with the sacking of Yaromir around TN 1537, where 55 revisionists were executed by the city-state government of Yaromir, which subsequently led to the razing of the city-state by the NLC. This single act cost over 3,500 lives, and the complete destruction of the city-state. In the wake of such a slaughter, the NLC ended the crusade and their expansionist philosophies were eventually curtailed, though the Norlighters never fully shook their reputation for fanaticism, even by the modern Terra Novan cycles of the 1900s. Though to be fair, this reputation was maintained prominently during St. Vincent's War in TN 1723, where Norlight forces were often seen as the most destructive, with their more extreme believers often calling for various holy wars. In the post-war period leading up to the 1950s, religious fundamentalism grew and tolerance of other beliefs lessened. These notions only grew more so with the assassination of Thor Hutchinson. But the NLC is not just a haven for religious zealots. They also have strong traditions and preferences for peace and democracy. Their government, for instance, is a multi-party representative democracy led by a president and an executive council known as the Chamber of Valeria. Opposite from the religious foundations of the NLC is the corporate-run United Mercantile Federation, the second largest but most heavily industrialized league in all of Terra Nova. In fact, their industrial output is so large that it is said over half of all products within the Confederated Northern city-states have been made in UMF factories. The Federation's origins can be traced back to another former power, the Lioness League, which formed in the cycle of TN 1528, which included the future UMF capital city of Lioness, Rapid City, Marathon, and Canterbury. But not long after its inception in the cycle of TN 1550, the League was on the verge of collapse due to high-level corruption and extreme financial incompetence. To address the resulting and immense financial deficit, the Lioness League government ceased funding their National Apprentice program, a key element in how their labor market created jobs. This had proven to be the straw that broke the camel's back. The citizenry were now faced with the rising taxes and little employment, so they began taking to the streets in what came to be the apprenticeship riots. The government, in response, used their military to beat down the people in what was becoming a rapidly devolving situation. But before things could descend into complete chaos, the corporations of the Lioness League banded together and used their security forces to enact a coup d'etat against the government and begin to set the foundation for the newly formed United Mercantile Federation. However, just because the old regime was finally ousted did not mean the financial woes they had created had disappeared. Fortunately, the new leaders of the UMF had an easy solution: rapid and aggressive expansion towards the other city-states. So between the 16th and 17th centuries, that's exactly what the UMF did. When aggressive diplomacy failed, military force was used to bring the defined city-states into the Federation, which inevitably brought them into conflict with the Northern Lights Confederacy and the Western Frontier Protectorate. In fact, the UMF's policy of aggressive expansion was what caused the other two leagues to form NATO, the Northern Allied Defense Organization, to effectively combat the Mercantiles. But even still, they could not beat the UMF, and their era of expansion only ended when UMF leadership realized that continued war would only lead to long-term financial losses. But what made the UMF's era of expansion so successful was not their military, but their negotiated terms in having a city-state join them. A potential candidate was allowed to keep their autonomy in administering their city's government, and would, on occasion, even receive aid from the UMF to fund their social systems. In return, a city-state would have to have their production output join that of the Federation, and its people had to buy from the markets of the greater UMF. This policy is why city-states with governments that would typically be at odds with the UMF's corporate-run business-first mentality end up as a part of the Federation, namely city-states like the religious matriarchy of Swanscombe, the monarchy of Ashington, and the pseudo-communist state of Zagreb being prominent members. In terms of the actual political structure of the United Mercantile Federation, they are a democracy in the basic sense. But the UMF utilizes a very different approach that's true to their business-focused ways. Citizens invest in the Federation by buying electoral vouchers, with their voting power tied directly to how many vouchers they have. These vouchers cost 1,000 credits each and expire after 5 years. Both individuals and legal entities can buy these vouchers and even trade them among others. This voucher system is important to the funding of the Federation, as tariffs and taxation are considered to be outright unconstitutional. The purchase of electoral vouchers, along with lottery tickets, help to fuel the machine of the UMF government. This policy of zero taxation encourages investment, and is, unsurprisingly, extremely popular with the citizenry, even helping to nurture a sense of patriotism among the people of the United Mercantiles. But opposite from the religious Norlighters and the business-focused Mercantiles lies the last major league of the North, the Western Frontier Protectorate, just regular, heavily armed folk living off the land. The WFP is the smallest of the three northern leagues, and their territory is primarily the Great Western Plain, which is an expansive area that is rich in the fertile soil needed for farming grain and growing johar crops. Unfortunately, what makes the Great Western Plain ideal for agriculture also makes them vulnerable to attack from bandits and other city-states due to the vast and open nature of the land. Because of this greater need for defense, the people of the western frontier have made the military a social institution in itself. It is even said that Protectorate society is based upon the army. This is visibly evident in the heavily militarized designs of their fortified city-states to ward off bandits and other aggressors. This importance on the army is only more solidified with the two classes of people in the WFP, citizens and residents. Citizens are those who have served in the military, be it in the WFP, the Greater CNCS, or another allied league for 5 cycles, 10 cycles, and 20 cycles respectively. In return, Protectorate citizens are given voting rights when elections are run for the military councils that lead the individual city-states, whereas residents have no voting rights and no voice in elections. Of course, when talking about the people of the Western Frontier Protectorate, there is one more difference that needs to be accounted for: the clans. In the earliest days of Terra Nova, the ranching families of the Great Western Plain would create alliances through blood relations and marriage for the survival of all involved. Over time, these alliances grew into the modern Western clans, which can consist of several family groups. The largest of these clans, namely the Zukos and the Maderas, can have over 1,000 members, whereas the smaller clans only a small handful, but most tend to have up to 200 members. All clans are typically led by the oldest, though on occasion a younger person is given the role of leader. But besides size, history, or resources, there are 2 major distinctions that often define a clan. The first being whether they are allied with the Zukites, those who believe most problems can be solved with the military led by the Zuko clan, and the Maderans, headed by the Maderas clan, who often lean towards diplomatic solutions. The second distinction is more rooted in history, and a clan can be either defined as a first or true clan, and the others who are called new clans. As one could guess, first clans were those who were founded before the creation of the Western Frontier Protectorate. In part because of this, first clans are more prominent in status. New clans, on the other hand, are not. They were the ones who immigrated to the Western Plain after the formation of the Protectorate. While typically new clans don't have the same venerated status as the true clans, there have been times when a new clan can rise in prestige through enough effort. Regardless of the clan type though, most if not all members are proud people, often quick to glorify and honor their heritage while downplaying disgraces. Honor and reputation are also key components of Western society, and often a person's honor is tied to that of the clan they're affiliated with. As such, individual dishonor can have wide-lasting repercussions for the entire clan. Perhaps because of this, when a member has been found guilty of a crime, the clan itself can be torn between protecting their own and adhering to the law, regardless of the official stance adopted by all clans that the Protectorate comes first. For this reason, the Protectorate army tends to err on the side of caution by ensuring that no single clan has a heavy presence in any single military unit. As one can begin to see, the world of Northern Terra Nova is rich in culture and history, and not everything could be covered here, such as greater details about revisionism in its Sorrento branch, particularly in the wake of Thor Hutchinson's death, the NLC's entrenched criminal element, Judas syndrome, or even the Badland Protectorates under CNCS Dominion. Then there's the rest of Terra Nova with the Allied Southern Territories, Peace River, the Black Talon, and the new coalition in Port Arthur. And even beyond Terra Nova, there's Earth and the Colonial Expeditionary Forces, the Grells, the planets of Caprice, Utopia, and Eden, among many other known planets formerly colonized by Earth. Suffice it to say, the known universe is vast, and we have only yet begun to scratch at its surface.